The ceasefire between Iran and Israel may sound like a welcome break in decades of tension, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking peace has suddenly arrived just because the headlines say so. See, truth ain't always pretty, but it's still the truth. And the truth here is that diplomacy, when built on shaky ground, is more performance than progress. A real peace isn't just about silencing the guns. It's about changing the intent behind them. And right now, it looks like both nations agreed to stop shooting, but not to stop aiming. Take a closer look at what actually happened during the ceasefire announcement. You saw officials shaking hands, reading carefully crafted statements, and the world breathing a sigh of relief. But what wasn't said spoke just as loudly. There were no mutual concessions, no acknowledgement of long-standing grievances, no signs of deeper cooperation or reconciliation. That's not peace. That's a commercial break in a show that's been running far too long. You have to wonder, if this ceasefire is so real, why do both sides keep posturing militarily in the shadows? Why are there still proxy forces on the ground in Syria, Lebanon, and elsewhere, subtly pushing the same agendas under different flags? It's like calling off the main actors while letting the stunt doubles keep fighting in the background. And if that's not performance, what is it? The political stage is bright, but the backstage is where the truth lies. The intelligence community on both sides has kept up their operations. Digital warfare hasn't slowed. Rhetoric may have softened on the surface, but beneath it all, there's still an undercurrent of deep distrust and resentment. Agreements made under pressure, whether political, economic, or global, often wear the mask of peace while hiding the face of self-interest. This isn't the first time this show has been put on. Look at history. How many ceasefires have come and gone without anything truly changing? If peace is real, it shows up in everyday life in borders that are no longer tense, in schools that aren't threatened, in economies that begin to trust each other again. But when the ink on a ceasefire hasn't dried, and you've already got both sides preparing for what happens next, that's not peace, that's a timeout. Now, I'm not here to say peace isn't possible. It is. But real peace takes more than signatures. It takes courage to face the uncomfortable truths. It takes leaders who are ready to be honest, even when the truth costs them something. And until that kind of honesty is on the table, all we're seeing is the performance, not the progress. Sometimes, stepping back from the fight isn't surrender, it's strategy. But don't call it peace until both the people and the policies reflect it. Peace without justice is just silence. That's the hard part nobody wants to talk about. Because when you declare a ceasefire without addressing the deeper, painful truths that led to the conflict in the first place, all you're doing is lowering the volume, not resolving the argument. Iran and Israel didn't just wake up one day and decide to be enemies. Their hostility is built on years, decades, of fear, mistrust, ideological opposition, and bloodshed. A ceasefire, in that context, isn't a solution. It's a bandage over a bullet wound. Let's break it down. What are the actual issues? Nuclear capabilities, proxy wars, religious and political ideologies, the regional influence struggle. None of those went away when the ceasefire was signed. None of them were even directly addressed in the agreement. So what are we really looking at? A photo op, a moment to breathe, maybe even a strategic move to regroup and re-strategize. But justice, resolution. Those weren't invited to the table. You see, justice demands accountability. It means both parties recognizing the harm they've caused, not just to each other, but to the countless civilians caught in between. It means stopping the use of third-party battlegrounds like Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, where proxy forces clash and civilians pay the price. A real peace would see those puppets disarmed and those strings cut. But that hasn't happened, and as long as Iran and Israel keep using the Middle East as their chessboard, this so-called peace remains nothing more than a calculated pause in a much longer game. We also need to talk about reparative trust. Peace built without trust is like building a house on sand. It'll stand for a moment, but the first wave will bring it down. Right now, there's no infrastructure of trust between Iran and Israel. No diplomatic channels fortified. No meaningful cultural exchange. No joint humanitarian efforts. Nothing that shows a willingness to coexist. Just an agreement to stop the fire without putting out the fuse. What makes it worse is that silence can be mistaken for stability. The international community, eager for quiet, might take this ceasefire as a sign that progress has been made. But silence without substance is dangerous. It lets the unresolved issues fester. It allows the old tensions to simmer just beneath the surface until one act, one drone, one airstrike, one assassination, sets the whole thing ablaze again. So if we're going to call this a step toward peace, let's be honest about what peace really means. It means justice. It means recognition. It means rebuilding trust. And it means doing the hard, uncomfortable work of healing, not just halting. Until then, this ceasefire is not a peace treaty. It's an intermission. And we all know the second act of a conflict can be deadlier than the first. You want to know if this ceasefire is real? Then don't just listen to what they say. Watch what they do. In a world driven by politics and optics, words are easy. It's the hands behind the curtain that tell the real story. And when you look at the actions of both Iran and Israel after the so-called ceasefire, you'll see a stage still set for conflict, not reconciliation. You can pause the dialogue, dim the lights, and shift the spotlight. But the core performance hasn't changed. Right after the ceasefire was announced, military analysts reported that Israel continued surveillance operations, and Iran didn't scale back its support to proxy groups. The quiet wasn't peace it was planning. A genuine ceasefire, if it's rooted in a desire for real peace, comes with de-escalation. It comes with concrete steps that reduce tension, pulling back troops, freezing hostile strategies, and building diplomatic frameworks to prevent flare-ups. But none of that happened here. Instead, both sides stayed alert, stayed armed, and stayed ready. What that tells you is simple. This wasn't peace. It was positioning. Israel might have toned down its language, but it didn't shift its stance on Iran's nuclear program. Iran, meanwhile, didn't stop developing its military infrastructure or supporting Hezbollah and others in the region. The words sounded good. The statements were crafted carefully, but the movements behind them, they betrayed a different motive. This is the kind of diplomacy that plays to the crowd, designed to cool the pressure from the international community, satisfy major powers, and restore calm for just long enough to rearm or recalibrate. It's a script they've run before, and the world's seen it too many times. The ceasefire becomes a distraction, a shiny surface that hides a boiling pot. The danger is, people believe it. They see leaders shaking hands or issuing joint statements, and they assume progress. But peace is more than public relations. Peace shows up in consistency, in restraint, in long-term cooperation, not just in one-time performances. If behind every carefully worded press conference there are still covert operations, still alliances fueling conflict, still maps being redrawn in war rooms, then what we're witnessing is not diplomacy, it's deception. And maybe that's the most dangerous part of all, because a staged agreement not only misleads the world, it buys time for new tactics. It tricks people into believing the storm has passed when, in reality, the thunder is just waiting for its cue. Real peace doesn't hide. It doesn't whisper one thing and do another. It stands tall even when it's hard, even when it costs. Until both sides are willing to act with the same integrity they speak with, we're not looking at peace, we're watching a performance dressed in the language of hope. When the cameras roll, the show begins. That's something we've seen time and time again in geopolitics, and the Iran-Israel ceasefire fits the pattern almost too perfectly. There's a certain choreography to these moments, statements crafted for global media, leaders standing behind podiums with flags fluttering, all smiles and staged solemnity. But real peace isn't found in a press conference. It's revealed in what happens when the lights go down and the audience goes home. This ceasefire came not after genuine resolution, but in the wake of growing international pressure. The world was watching. Allies were urging restraint. Economies were feeling the strain. So, in the glare of the spotlight, both sides did what seasoned actors do. They delivered lines written for them, lines that would calm nerves and give the illusion of diplomacy. The timing was too clean, the rhetoric too polished, not a single word out of step. And when that happens, you've got to ask, is this a breakthrough or just another act? Political theater is powerful. It buys time, it shapes perception, it shifts narratives, but it does not change reality. The reality here is that while Iran and Israel may have shaken hands with their voices, their fists are still clenched behind their backs. That's not peace, that's stagecraft, and let's not ignore the fact that this ceasefire benefited both sides in the short term. For Israel, it reduced international scrutiny and deflected criticism. For Iran, it eased tensions while it focused on strengthening internal stability and external alliances. Each party got something out of the performance. And when both sides profit from an agreement without addressing the core grievances between them, it's not a peace deal. It's a deal with peace as the selling point, not the substance. The global audience, nations, media, citizens wanted relief. They wanted to believe in a turning point, and so they applauded a scene that looked hopeful. But here's the thing about applause. It's fleeting, and once it fades, reality steps back in. The missile silos are still armed. The ideological divides still run deep. The regional alliances that fuel proxy battles are still intact. The theater might have paused, but the war machine didn't stop spinning. If this was real peace, there would be visible signs of change. There would be dismantled hostilities, reduced rhetoric, and real efforts toward people engagement, but all we've seen is a script written to please, not to resolve. That's why calling this ceasefire genuine is like mistaking the actor for the character, believing what you see, even when you know it's rehearsed. The world doesn't need another performance. It needs a reckoning. A commitment to dialogue, to humility, to action beyond the cameras. Until that curtain rises and both nations show up unscripted, this so-called peace will remain just another scene in a long, running play of conflict. History has a habit of repeating itself, especially when it's ignored. That's the uncomfortable truth behind the Iran-Israel ceasefire. Because if we take a step back and look at the timeline, this isn't the first time we've seen two hostile forces declare a halt in aggression with no real intent to heal. It's a cycle we've seen before. Tension builds, violence erupts, pressure mounts, and suddenly, there's a ceasefire. But no justice, no resolution, no reckoning, and then the cycle resets. Only next time the stakes are higher. When we ask whether this ceasefire is real or staged, we have to ask a deeper question. Did either side actually learn anything from what came before? Because history has given us the answer already, over and over again. Agreements without reconciliation, silence without understanding, pauses without reform. They don't hold. They might give temporary relief, but in the long run, they leave people more disillusioned, more bitter, more ready to fight again. Take a look at previous patterns in the region. In past decades, we've seen brief de-escalations between major powers in the Middle East. Some were mediated by global superpowers, others initiated by mutual exhaustion. And every time, people hoped this would be the one, but the root issues were always left to rot. And like any rot, when ignored, it spreads. Ceasefires signed under political duress or strategic necessity, without confronting ideological divides or territorial ambitions, become nothing more than empty signatures, rituals performed in the name of peace, while preparing for the next phase of war. And if that's the road we're on again, then we're not witnessing a new chapter. We're stuck in a rerun, because what we've failed to do, time and again, is to face the discomfort of history head on. We want quick fixes. Fast declarations, clear winners and losers, but real peace doesn't work that way. It demands we go back, unpack the damage done, the promises broken, the lives lost, and build something new with truth at the center. But what we've seen instead is both sides walking the familiar path, sign the deal, smile for the world, and quietly prepare for what's next. You know it's true when you see Iran boosting its influence across the region, quietly strengthening ties with its proxies. You see it when Israel remains on high alert, its intelligence networks still humming with activity. Both sides are leaning on old habits because they've learned that public memory is short, and history, when inconvenient, gets rewritten or ignored. So here we are again, standing in the same place we've stood before, the same headlines, the same cautious optimism, the same underlying instability, and unless this time is different, and I mean truly different, with honesty, with accountability, with action, we already know how this ends. Because history doesn't just repeat itself when forgotten. It punishes those who refuse to learn from it. Ace, then you need real people at the table. Not just diplomats in suits with rehearsed lines and hidden agendas. Not just political elites shaking hands for the camera. I'm talking about the people who live with the consequences of every missile, every airstrike, every blockade, every proxy war. The ordinary families in Tehran and Tel Aviv, the civilians in Beirut and Gaza, the youth who grow up hearing sirens more often than music. They're the ones who should matter most. But in ceasefires like this one between Iran and Israel, their voices are the first to be left out. Because what good is a deal if it's only made by those who aren't paying the price of war? When leaders negotiate behind closed doors, often the deal they strike is about strategy, not survival. They look at maps, not mourning. They talk in terms of interests and security, but rarely in terms of human lives. That disconnect is dangerous. It leads to ceasefires like this one. Shallow, fragile, performative. Agreements made to serve political optics instead of the people's need. Look at the ground reality. The tensions between Iran and Israel go far beyond state politics. They're embedded in culture, in fear, in propaganda, in generations of mutual demonization. Those scars don't get erased by a signature. Healing them takes contact. It takes dialogue across borders, between communities, between people who have never had the chance to see each other as human. Where is that in this ceasefire? Where is the effort to bring scholars, activists, artists, and youth into the process? Where is the space for truth and reconciliation? When people are excluded from the peace process, the peace doesn't last. Because it doesn't belong to them. It feels imposed, not earned. Real peace requires ownership. It needs to be felt in the streets, in classrooms, in homes. Not just in newsrooms. You want a sustainable ceasefire. Then build trust from the bottom up. Not just the top down. Think about South Africa. Think about Northern Ireland. Peace came not just through political deals, but through inclusive processes, community engagement, and deep, painful conversations about the past. Iran and Israel have never even come close to that. And until they do, until they decide to invest in the human side of peace, not just the strategic side, every deal will remain a temporary truce dressed up as a historic breakthrough. So the next time we call something a peace agreement, let's ask who was in the room when it was made. Let's ask who benefits and who's forgotten. Because if the people who suffer the most don't get a seat at the table, then it's not a peace table. It's just a stage, and the war is waiting in the wings.